You assume a pirate ship is the cheapest business ever run. No rent, no taxes, no boss, just a fast boat, a black flag, and whatever you can take from someone weaker. That's the image most people carry around. It's almost the opposite of the truth. A pirate ship in the early 1700s was one of the most expensive, most precarious operations a person could be involved in, and the men who actually captained one were usually broke, hunted, and dead within a few years. Understanding why reveals something bigger about how piracy really worked as a business, and who was really getting rich from it. Start with the vessel itself, because that's where the fantasy breaks down fastest. A capable pirate ship wasn't a rowboat with a skull painted on the side. The ships pirates actually wanted, fast sloops, well-armed brigantines, or captured merchant vessels refitted for combat, needed a hull sound enough to survive months at sea, masts and rigging that could outrun a naval patrol, and enough cannon to make merchant captains surrender without a fight, because a fight was expensive in a different way. It damaged the one asset the whole operation depended on. Acquiring a ship like that, whether by purchase, theft, or capture, was only the beginning of the expense. Every few months the hull needed careening, hauled onto a beach, scraped clean of barnacles and rot, and resealed, or the ship would slow down enough to be caught by anything faster. That process needed a safe, hidden stretch of coastline, tools, tar, timber, and time the crew wasn't earning anything. Then there was the crew itself, and this is where the real weight of the business sits. A successful pirate ship might carry 80 to 150 men. Every one of them needed food, fresh water, rum, and a share of whatever the ship took. None of that was free, and almost none of it was optional, because a hungry, unpaid, undisciplined crew was far more dangerous to a captain than any navy. So before a pirate ship took a single prize, it was already running at a loss. A floating operation with a large, permanent payroll and no guaranteed income. That raises an obvious question. Who was funding all of this before the money started coming in? The answer is where the story stops matching the legend. Piracy in its most organized form often began with legitimate money, or at least money that wanted to look legitimate. Many pirate voyages started life as privateering ventures, legally sanctioned raids against enemy shipping during wartime, backed by investors ashore who supplied ships, weapons, and provisions in exchange for a cut of whatever was captured. These backers were frequently respectable men, merchants, colonial officials, sometimes even governors, who financed the voyage quietly and collected their share when the ship returned. No questions asked about how closely the crew had stuck to the legal boundaries of their commission. Captain William Kidd is the clearest illustration of this. His 1696 voyage was financed by a group of English nobles and a colonial governor who expected a return on their investment. When Kidd's voyage drifted from privateering into outright piracy, those same backers distanced themselves fast enough to leave him alone to face the consequences, while quietly keeping whatever profit had already changed hands. The pattern repeats throughout the era. The people who put up the capital rarely swung from a gallows. The people who ran the operation on the water usually did. Once a ship was underway and had genuinely gone rogue, flying under its own authority instead of a state's, its internal economics started to resemble something closer to a worker-owned company than a criminal gang. This is one of the more surprising parts of the story. Pirate crews typically operated under a written set of rules called the ship's articles, agreed to and signed by every man before the voyage began. These articles set out how prize money would be divided. The captain and quartermaster took a larger share, usually 1.5 to 2 shares each, in return for the responsibility of command, while ordinary crew members split the rest roughly equally. That's already a flatter distribution of profit than almost any legitimate merchant voyage of the period, where a ship's owners took the overwhelming majority of any return and sailors were paid a fixed, modest wage, regardless of how successful the voyage was. The articles usually went further than pay. Many crews built in a form of compensation for injury, a set payment from the common fund for the loss of an eye, an arm, or a leg in battle, paid before the remaining prize money was divided among the crew. It's a rough, early version of workplace injury compensation, agreed to voluntarily by men who had no legal system to enforce it except each other. That detail matters because it shows piracy wasn't chaos with a flag. It was a business trying to solve the same problems every business solves. How to share risk, how to reward leadership, how to keep workers from quitting or mutinying, just without any court to appeal to if someone broke the agreement. But an equal share of nothing is still nothing, and this is where the operation's real vulnerability shows up. Prizes were unpredictable. A pirate ship could spend weeks patrolling a shipping lane and find only empty water, or find a ship carrying timber and salted fish instead of coin and silk. Contrary to the treasure chest image, most captured cargo wasn't gold. It was ordinary trade goods: sugar, cloth, tools, tobacco, things that needed to be sold before they became money at all. That meant a pirate crew needed access to a market willing to buy stolen goods without asking where they came from, and willing to sell food, rum, and gunpowder back to men the rest of the world had declared enemies of all nations. That need created one of the strangest institutions of the entire period, the pirate port. Places like Nassau in the Bahamas functioned, for a window of roughly a decade around 1715 to 1725, almost like a small independent economy built entirely around processing the proceeds of piracy. Merchants there bought stolen cargo at a discount and resold it through ordinary trade channels, effectively laundering it back into the legitimate economy. Tavern keepers, prostitutes, ship chandlers, and provisioners all depended on pirate spending to survive, which meant the town had a strong economic incentive to protect protect the very men the British Empire wanted hanged. For a few years, piracy wasn't just tolerated in Nassau, it was the local economy. That's the part of the picture that rarely makes it into the romantic version. Piracy needed a functioning, cooperative civilian economy to work at all. Without somewhere to sell the goods and resupply the ship, a pirate crew was just a group of armed men slowly starving at sea. This is where the chain reaction begins, and it's worth tracing carefully because it explains why the entire golden age of piracy collapsed within roughly a decade. Success bred visibility. The more prizes a crew took, the more valuable ships avoided that shipping lane, which pushed pirates toward larger, riskier targets to maintain the same income. And larger targets meant more attention from the naval powers whose trade was being disrupted. Insurance costs for merchant shipping rose. Colonial governors, who had sometimes quietly tolerated or even profited from piracy, came under pressure from London and other capitals to shut it down, both to protect trade and to protect their own careers. Naval patrols increased. And crucially, the ports that had allowed piracy to function as a business, buying the goods, selling the supplies, hiding the ships, began shutting their doors under threat of losing their own legal trading privileges. When Nassau was formally brought back under British control in 1718, with a new governor offering pardons to pirates who surrendered, the market that had made piracy commercially viable started disappearing. A pirate ship with nowhere to sell its cargo and nowhere safe to careen its hull wasn't a business anymore. It was a target with a deadline. The clearest illustration of this entire economic arc, from formation to collapse, is Bartholomew Roberts, known to history as Black Bart. Roberts didn't begin as a pirate captain. He was serving as third mate on a slave ship when it was captured by pirates in 1719, and, according to accounts from the period, he initially had little interest in joining them. Within weeks of being forced into the crew, their captain was killed, and Roberts, reportedly chosen partly because he had the navigational skill the rest of the crew lacked, was elected to replace him. That detail alone undercuts the myth of the fearsome pirate captain seizing power through violence. Roberts got the job because the business needed a competent operator, and the crew picked one democratically. What followed was, by any measure, the most commercially successful piracy operation of the era. Over roughly 3 years, Roberts's ships captured somewhere in the range of 400 vessels, an extraordinary volume that dwarfed nearly every other pirate captain of the period. He expanded operations across the Caribbean and then to the coast of West Africa, adapting to naval pressure by moving into waters where patrols were thinner. He imposed strict discipline through his own version of the ship's articles. No gambling, lights out at a set hour, no women allowed aboard. Rules aimed less at morality than at keeping a large, well-armed crew functional and free of the disputes that sank so many other pirate ventures from the inside. But volume of prizes is not the same as accumulated wealth, and this is the counterintuitive turn in Roberts' story. Despite capturing an enormous number of ships, there's little evidence Roberts himself died wealthy. The overhead never stopped. Every captured ship still needed to be evaluated, its useful cargo sold or absorbed, its crew subdued or recruited, and the operation still needed food, repairs, and gunpowder every single week, regardless of how the previous prize had gone. A high volume of captures kept the operation solvent. It didn't make anyone rich in a lasting sense, because the money moved through the crew and back into the same costs almost as fast as it arrived. In February 1722, off the coast of what is now Gabon, Roberts's ship was engaged by a British naval vessel, HMS Swallow, sent specifically to hunt him down. Roberts was killed early in the fighting, reportedly by grape shot to the throat. His crew, following his own instructions in the event of his death, threw his body overboard rather than let it be captured and displayed. Of the surviving crew taken prisoner, roughly 52 were later tried, and more than half of those were hanged. The most prolific pirate operation of the Golden Age ended not with treasure, but with a body thrown into the Atlantic and a mass trial in a British colonial court. That ending points to the honest financial reality underneath the entire era. For the small number of pirates who quit early, kept a low profile, and quietly spent their share before authorities caught up with them, piracy could produce a genuine windfall, a handful of years of income compressed into a single lucky haul. Henry Every's crew, who captured a Mughal treasure ship in 1695 in what may have been the single most lucrative pirate haul in history, largely scattered and vanished into ordinary colonial life, and most were never caught, which made that outcome the best-case scenario piracy could offer: one enormous payout, followed by disappearing before the business caught up with you. The realistic successful outcome looked more like a career sailor doing several years of ordinary piracy, taking modest prizes, living reasonably well in a port like Nassau while it lasted, and eventually accepting a royal pardon before the naval crackdown arrived, trading the danger for a quiet, legal exit with whatever savings remained. The realistic negative outcome, and by far the most common one, looked like Roberts's crew: years of operational income that never became lasting wealth, ending in capture, trial, and execution, with whatever money had passed through their hands already spent on rum, repairs, and provisions long before the noose was involved. So the honest answer to who owned a pirate ship and who actually profited from it splits cleanly in two. On paper, the crew owned it. They voted for their captain, split the profits by contract, and shared the risk collectively in a way no merchant sailor of the era ever did. But the money that made the whole system possible in the first place often came from investors ashore who never set foot on deck, and the money that made it usable came from merchants in ports like Nassau who bought stolen cargo at a discount and sold it back into the legitimate world at a markup, keeping their own hands clean the entire time. The pirates took the physical risk. The financiers and fences took a smaller, safer cut of nearly the same profit, over and over, without ever facing a naval broadside or a colonial courtroom. That's the deeper truth beneath the flag and the fantasy. Piracy wasn't an escape from the economy of its time. It was a rougher, faster, more violent version of the same economy. Investors, overhead, labor shares, insurance, supply chains, and market access, just operating without the legal protections that let the legitimate version survive its bad years. The ship might have flown a black flag, but underneath it, it was still running on the same math as everything else on the water. The only difference was that when a merchant venture failed, the owner lost some money. When a pirate venture failed, the crew lost their lives.